Hey y'all. Well, thank you for tuning into the third now, episode of my podcast, Not Forsaken. I'm Jennifer Greenberg, and of course, this podcast is named after my book, Not Forsaken, which you can find on Amazon. It is a story of life after abuse, and it's semi-autobiographical, but the main focus is on spiritual recovery following trauma, such as abuse. And that includes child abuse, domestic violence, and so on. And I've been very blessed to find a wonderful publisher, and I'm excited to announce that the Spanish edition should be coming out next year. As well as an audiobook. So lots of great things happening. God has really been gracious, and he is actively working in his church and in our world today. So what I wanted to start with today before we dig into our topic, we have a heavy topic, but it's very relevant. And even though it's heavy, I don't find these topics, they're challenging, they're difficult, and I want to be careful how I discuss them, but I don't find them stressful or depressing to talk about, at least not anymore. I think I used to years back when I first started talking about a lot of this stuff, and part of that was because I was still processing a lot of my own trauma. I still am. Do you ever really stop? But anyway, it's actually, I'd go so far as to say that it's become a joy to me. And I want to tell you why. It's because when we understand how messed up this world is, this world that we're living in, we long for heaven, right? We long for glory and paradise with Jesus. Every so often on Twitter, I like to tweet, "We are one day closer to seeing Jesus face to face." And I really mean that. And part of the reason that I mean that is because I'm familiar with the yuck. I'm familiar with the darkness, the depravity of the human soul, of our fallen state. And, there's a saying, I'm going to misquote it. You can Google it. Google it for me, okay? And somebody put it in the comments. But it's, "Only in the darkness can you see the stars." And I love that quote because when we recognize how sinful we are, when we tackle these heavy topics like abuse, and of course depression is not a sin, but so often we're depressed because bad things have happened to us. People around us have sinned, or maybe we're struggling with sin. But when we recognize that darkness, when we acknowledge our sorrow and our pain and the depth of the fall, we can understand to a greater degree how gracious and loving and merciful God is. Because if we didn't know we were sinners, if we didn't understand how deep our suffering is, how deep our sorrow and our grief is over evil and tragedy and loss, we wouldn't understand what a great and marvelous God we have. What a miraculous Redeemer we have. That he would leave glory up in heaven and come down into this dark and fallen world to become human, to become someone who gets viruses and who has people, be mean, and who has broken relationships. And he did that for us. And so that's spectacular. It's just spectacular. And so that's why I consider talking about these issues to actually be, yes, it's sad and it's difficult, but it's also very uplifting. Because we know our fallenness, we know how great God is, or at least to a greater degree than we would if we had easy lives. And so that is my prayer for you all as you listen to this podcast, that as we talk about the hardship, that you would long for heaven, that you would look to God and recognize to a new degree how holy and wonderful he is. This week has been particularly, I don't want to say difficult, but complicated for me. We've a lot of people online are talking about this, second wave or, another spike of the COVID virus. So a lot of people are very scared. A lot of people are deprived of socialization. They're lonely. They don't have the companionship they need to kind of lift them up out of those dips in their mood. And so people are getting depressed. I've actually had the honor, it is an honor. I've had the honor of working with 3 people just in the past week who were borderline or suicidal. One of them is actually in the hospital now, and he was very brave, and he got the treatment that he needed, and he spoke the truth, even though it was very upsetting to not only to him but also to his family to hear. I've been walking through that with some people, and then I also encountered some church cover-ups of child abuse. And so I was able to work with law enforcement on that. And, as encouraging as it is to know that, I learned that there's an investigation into one of the abusers that I reported. As encouraging as that is, I still grieve, for the children who have suffered and for the sin that motivated these church leaders to cover up that abuse. For whatever reason, whether it be their reputation or because they were friends with the abuser, I don't know. But whatever the case, the reasoning was terrible and evil. And so, it's the weekend, it is Friday, it is almost Friday night. And, it's almost Thanksgiving. And so I'm just kind of trying to align my heart, thanking God that I was able to hear from these people, that I was able to inform law enforcement, and hopefully God will continue to work through these various situations to bring about peace and repentance and healing and, whatever else needs to happen to just help these, the injured recover and those who are guilty receive justice. So I want to do something kind of new. It feels kind of silly to call it new because this is only my 3rd episode. So this whole thing is new, but I want to open up this podcast in prayer really quickly. The topics today are difficult, but as I said before, we're going to be approaching them in a very hopeful manner, looking to God, looking to heaven as our true home. And so the topics that I'm going to answer 2 questions today. Originally I was planning to do 3 separate episodes. And then I realized that I'm way overcomplicating this. And also the holidays are close upon us, and all these issues need to be addressed prior to the holidays, like next week. So I'm going to kind of compress this into one episode, one probably longer than usual episode. I don't know, we'll see. But I'm going to answer 2 questions, and they're kind of related. Question number 1, how do I cope with depression during COVID shutdowns? How do I cope with depression during COVID shutdowns? And question 2, how do I cope with toxic family members, specifically over the holidays? And now toxic family members in this context is specifically family members who are covering for or defending or supporting an abuser. But of course, with the crazy election that we recently had in the US, there is a lot of tension in many families. And so I'm kind of expanding this not to only be about abuse, but also how do we cope with those family members who are really ardently on one side of the aisle or the other? How do we manage these holiday situations so that we can have a loving, thankful time this Thanksgiving that's hopefully not divided and divisive? So that's my goal for this episode. Why do something small? But anyway, so I want to open us with prayer so that not only for my wisdom, but also for you who are listening, that we would be benefited mutually by this. So, dear Lord Jesus, I thank you for this opportunity, for the technology that we have to enable this opportunity. It was not long ago that we didn't have streaming technology, and one thing that these shutdowns have done is they've forced me to get to learn how to use all this stuff and to get my message, and really your message, because it's the gospel, out in a new way. And so thank you for that, Lord. Thank you for this opportunity to fellowship together, even though we may be far apart. Lord, I would specifically pray for people who are suffering with depression, whether their depression be resultant from an illness or some trauma in their background, like an emotional injury. I would ask that you comfort them, Lord. I would ask that you give them the wisdom and the patience to be kind to themselves, and to know how to cope with these things. Whether or not my advice is helpful or encouraging or not, Lord, I would ask that you just give them this wisdom in their special circumstance to know how to cope with these things, how to manage these things, so that they can avoid just bad days, Lord, but specifically suicidal ideation, Lord, that is clearly on the rise, as I've heard from 3 different people just in the past week who were suicidal. Lord, please lift this darkness that is over our land. Bring healing to our land. Give doctors and our leaders wisdom. Bless us with a cure for this virus. Bless us with a vaccine that is dependable and trustworthy. Bless people with wisdom as they decide whether or not to go out or stay home or travel. Lord, just in all our own unique situations, in our perspectives, with whatever challenges we're dealing with, Lord, give us wisdom so that we know how to be safe and we know how to love our neighbors in this time, and respect other people's choices, how they're going to react to the massive amount of confusion and stress we are all under. And Lord, I would also ask for people who are alone during this holiday season, for whatever reason, if they can't travel, if it's just not safe for them to travel, or if they just don't have family, Lord, please be with those people. You know, you said where 2 or 3 gather together in my name, there I am. And Lord, sometimes it's just one of us on the holidays, or 2 of us, or one of us and a cat, as would be my case if I was single. But anyway, Lord, I would just ask that you bless people who are lonely, and also bless people who are traveling or who are getting together with toxic or abusive or just dysfunctional family members, that you would bless them with inner peace, bless them with calm, but most of all, Lord, bless them with wisdom so that they know how to establish boundaries and how to protect themselves. Lord, do not let them put themselves in harm's way, whether that be physical harm or emotional, spiritual harm. Lord, protect them, bless them with wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so our first question is, how do I cope with depression during COVID shutdowns? So this is particularly tough, I think, for a lot of people. We are learning to a new degree how much we depend on socialization for our emotional stability. I am obviously not a particularly shy person, but as a writer, I also tend to be kind of introverted. So I go back and forth. I can be alone for a whole week just writing my book. But if I'm going through a hard time, you know, getting out around my friends, getting a hug, it's so important to me. It's like psychologically necessary for me to have contact with people, to be able to shake their hands, to be able to give them a hug, you know, and to get a hug. So this has been really hard. And I don't think that, Hi, baby girl, what's up? You bumped your head on the stairs? Come here. Where? Right there? I'm sorry. Can you go watch your show for a little bit longer? Mommy's doing her podcast still.
Why is
My earrings are there because I did not put them away like I should have. Why don't you go watch your show, okay? And ask Daddy for help. Daddy's in his office.
But Mom, but my show paused.
You know how to unpause your show. Close the door, sweet pea. I love you. What are you giving me the hairy eyeball for? All right, so anyway, how do I cope with depression during COVID? And I think what I was saying was how difficult this has all been. And I don't think that many of our leaders and unfortunately influencers understand the level of danger that these shutdowns, like on the one hand, we want to be safe from the virus, right? We want to protect the elderly. We want to protect people who have weak immune systems, who are high risk. Obviously, amen. Yes, we need to protect those people. But at the same time, there are people who are depressed, who depend on interaction for their emotional well-being. And I'm seeing a rise in depression, and I'm seeing a rise in suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. So, and I've tried to research, statistics like in 2020, like, is there really a rise? Like, where is it happening? Who is seeing it? And the information right now is really vague and unsubstantiated. And I think part of that is because a lot of times government organizations and nonprofits, they gather all the statistics at the end of the year, right? And we're not at the end of the year yet. So, but all I can do is testify to what I am personally seeing. There is a rise in depression and there is a rise in suicidal ideation. And these are just the people that reach out to me. There are many people who do not reach out to anyone, and that's scary. That's where the really high risk people are. It's those people who never say anything. So a few ways to cope with depression during COVID shutdowns to try to, and obviously each state's regulations are different. Even each city's or county's regulations are different. So I'm going to give you very generic advice, and it's going to be kind of up to you to figure out what is safe and or legal for you to do. So I don't want to be giving you like advice that's like contrary to, something that your local government is telling you. But so just generally speaking, this is what I can advise you in my experience with my knowledge. Okay, big disclaimer there. My first advice is to get out of the house. That could mean just getting your mail. That could mean taking your dog on a walk. That could mean going on a jog. Exercise is a big one. My second advice is exercise. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that exercise, it's not just about making you look hot and sexy or whatever, or strong and manly. It also influences the chemicals in your brain, your hormones, your endorphins. And so an active person, a person who's struggling with depression, if they're active, that's going to, for lack of my unscientific explanation of this, right? But it's going to help ease their anxiety and their sadness and their self-image. Because you're doing this for yourself. You're not doing it for anybody else. You're not doing it for your boyfriend or your husband or your wife or, whatever. You're doing this for you so that you have more energy, so that you're stronger. And one of the things that I've seen talked about by a lot of health officials is that the healthier you are, right, the more you exercise, the less risk you actually have of, having a really severe COVID struggle. So if you were to get the virus. So it's just good all around, just to be healthy and exercise. And that could look like lifting weights in your garage. That could look like walking around the block. That could look like going on a jog. Okay, so it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to join a gym. You don't have to buy a bunch of equipment. You can just get outside. That sunshine, that vitamin D is super helpful if you struggle with anxiety or depression. And then on that exercise, getting your heart rate up, getting your blood flowing is helpful for your self-confidence, your mood, your energy levels. So it's just good all around. My third advice is to have a regular sleep schedule. We recently had the time change, so that's throwing everybody off. A lot of people are stressed about the election. A lot of people are stressed about COVID. And so that's damaging a lot of people's sleep cycles. So what we want to do is we want to try to get a regular 8 hours of sleep every night, or 9 if you need it like me. That's as simple as just like going to bed at the same time, not binging on Netflix until midnight so you only get 5 hours of sleep the next day. We need to have self-control. We need to be getting to bed at a regular time every night, even on the weekends, especially now that I think a lot of people are working from home. And so there's a tendency to stay up later and later on weekdays as if it's the weekend. And, you know how it is. When you're tired, everything's worse. It's harder to think clearly. You're going to be more prone to depression, to anxiety. You're not going to feel like you're getting your work done. It's going to stress you out worse. So, get enough sleep. Get on a regular schedule so that you're going to bed the same time every night on weekdays and weekends. My fourth, I alphabetized these, so I have to think about whether it's the third or the fourth. The fourth is eat right. Again, a lot of people are working from home, and so instead of taking an hour for lunch, they're just kind of snacking throughout the day, which is fine if that works for you. But a lot of people just skip lunch. They don't even notice that they haven't eaten until about 3 or 4 p.m. And by then you've got a headache and you're groggy and you're just grumpy and hangry. So make sure you're eating right. And, eating healthy it's important too. And, I'm not saying, I love chocolate and I love cheese and I love having a glass of wine. But let's face it, when you're under a great deal of stress or you're prone to depression and prone to anxiety, we need to have a special level of discipline with what we eat, when we eat, because it's just going to affect our overall mood and, again, our self-confidence and our energy levels. So make sure you're getting, protein, you're eating your vegetables and fruit and staying really hydrated. These are just practical things. But, as an adult, these are the things I usually let slide. I'll skip lunch so I can keep writing, or I'll forget to eat breakfast, or I'll just eat some leftover pizza with my 4-year-old, and then I feel like crud the rest of the day. So think about what you're eating and when you're eating and how often, and don't let yourself get so hungry that your mood suffers. Next is socialize. And I know that's really hard to figure out how to do in this environment. I would say it's a great time to be having barbecues. You can set up some lawn chairs and sit 6 feet apart in your driveway with your neighbors or your friends, and you can have a barbecue. Figure out ways that work for you. Maybe you have a autoimmune deficiency or you're high risk and you need to be extra careful. Make sure that you are calling people on the phone, that you're using tools like Zoom, that you're seeing people's faces and hearing people's voices, that you're interacting with people. I can't overstate how important this is, because you really will go stir crazy. You're going to wind up at a place where you're depressed, you're lonely, and you feel too depressed and overwhelmed by depression to reach out to people. So do this now before you get overwhelmed by that feeling of loneliness and that feeling of hopelessness. It's really, really important to socialize. My final advice on this question is to compartmentalize. This is something that I am particularly bad at. And because I am particularly bad at it, I know exactly how to do it. That sounds funny, but it's true. So because I'm bad at this, I have worked really hard to figure out ways to compartmentalize, like little tips and tricks and methods that kind of force me to do it, even though this isn't a natural thing for me to do. One of the things that I love doing is I don't love it, it's not fun, but I make a list of things that are bothering me. Okay, this can be anything from like something terrible, like a friend passed away or a family member died, to nitty gritty, like little things like, my toddler is having meltdowns, or I've got another migraine today, or just mundane stuff, I mean, on the spectrum of what's bothering us, there are minor things and there are major things, right? But when you add them all together, when it becomes like an avalanche of difficult, irritating, frustrating, depressing stuff, that's when we get tripped up. So make a list of the things that are bothering you. Then take that list and divide it into 2 categories, okay? Things that you can control and things that you cannot control. All right? Things that you can control, things that you cannot control. For example, on my list of things that I can control, my house is messy. Well, okay, I can clean my house, right? That's something I can control to a degree within reason, given that I have 3 small children, right? I can clean it insofar as I am able to keep it clean. Okay, so that's something that's in my control. But that another thing that's bothering me is that I have a friend who just ghosted me and they're not talking to me anymore. I just threw my cable everywhere. I can't control that, okay? I can't control the behavior of other people. I can't control how they feel. I can't control how responsible they are to deal with their sin. I can't control how they're going to react to me. Like, I don't know, maybe they have a problem with me and they just haven't told me. I have no idea. But regardless, I've tried reaching out to them. They're not responding. I can't do anything about it, okay? So that's on my list of things I can't control, all right? You cannot control other people's behavior or other people's feelings. You just can't. So separating your list into things you can control and things you can't control. Then what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, this is my list of things I can't control. So I'm going to not worry about these things. I'm going to set it over here and I'm just going to pray about these things. Then I'm going to take my list of things that I can control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to prioritize them. Okay. Doing the dishes, way more important than sorting my closet, for example. So I'm going to prioritize these, I don't know, from 1 to 10. And just as I have time, as I'm able, I'm going to tackle those tasks and I'm going to get these things done. And in so doing, I'm going to take stress factors off my plate, okay? So these things are not going to be stressing me anymore because I'm going to know that I'm doing my best to deal with these things. These are things that I can control and I am doing things to fix them or alleviate them or whatever it may be. So prioritize, and again, just take one thing at a time. Like you don't have to do all these things at once. It's, my pastor, Bill Shishko, he likes to say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I don't know why anyone would eat an elephant, but if you were going to, you would need to do it one bite at a time. So we take these tasks and we tackle them one little step at a time. And you might even need to divide one task into, 3 different stages or what have you, just to make it manageable. And that's okay. All right. But so map it out and don't give yourself a deadline. I hate deadlines. They stress me out. So when I'm stressed, deadlines, no, that's not helpful. I just write out the steps and I tackle what I can control, one thing at a time, one piece at a time. And finally, boundaries. Boundaries are so important when you're depressed or you're anxious. What are boundaries? Okay, boundaries are, for example, if you have someone in your life who stresses the heck out of you, and it is within your power to not be around this person, then don't be around that person. Okay? It's okay. If they call you, sure, answer the phone, but you don't have to go out of your way. You don't owe them your friendship, right? If all they do is bring stress into your life and you're already struggling with anxiety and depression, it's okay. You can give yourself some space, all right? Another stress factor that I know we're all suffering from is the news. If you go on Twitter, you can mute words. I've muted Trump. I've muted Biden. I've muted the New York Post. And the reason is because they posted this article about eating mealworms in hamburgers, and I do not need that in my life. I just do not. It creeped me out. But anyway, so, you can mute these words on social media. You can avoid these topics. The other thing is, you can tell family members and friends, look, I get stressed when we talk about politics, so can we just not talk about that? I get stressed when we talk about things that are on the news. Can we just not talk? I get stressed when we argue about religion. Let's just, shelve that issue for a while because I'm already stressed and, I really want to spend time with you and I want our time to be beneficial and loving and healthy, and I want to have a relationship with you, and I just don't feel that this is a good thing for us to be talking about right now. Okay, so boundaries, and communicate these boundaries with other people. If something's stressing you, it's okay to tell them. Everybody needs boundaries, okay? And if somebody thinks they don't need boundaries, then they're probably in some kind of denial. So that's pretty much how I recommend coping with depression during COVID shutdown. And of course, as Christians, we also need to be spending a lot of time in prayer and in God's word. Pour all these things out to God. Whenever anything is on your mind, you can pray any time of the day. You can go through your day praying and just telling God, God, while I'm doing the dishes, let me tell you about this thing. I'm worried about my kids in school, or, my daughter's dealing with a bully, or, my husband's job, is stressful right now. Please help me to be supportive of him, or, whatever may be on your mind, pour those things out to God. Vent those things to God, because He is the counselor. He is our mighty counselor. He's totally confidential. He won't judge us because we are in Jesus Christ, right? So that's just a really good way that I've found to just kind of process those things and let them go and realize what's bothering me and separating that from what really matters and from what's maybe just I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. So but moving on to our next question. How do I cope with toxic family members over the holidays? And this includes family members who are defending or supporting an abuser. But it also includes, like I said before, family members who maybe are on the opposite side of the aisle from us, but they're very passionate about what they think and they love telling us about it over dinner. So, one thing that I want to talk about too is there's two types of people who will support your abuser. If you have an abuser, there's two types of people, and there's probably more, but generally speaking, there's two types of people. There are enablers and there are victims, okay? There are enablers and there are victims. Now, enablers in the purest sense are people who are really, they're kind of abusers themselves. They're covering up abuse. They're participating in empowering your abuser. They are trying to silence you. They maybe know, they may know that you were abused, that you're telling the truth, but they think you should just, let the past be in the past and get over it and suck it up and all that stuff. That's an enabler, okay? They're not healthy people. They're actually usually psychological abusers. Best case scenario, they're idiots. And so it's not good. It's not good to be an enabler, and we need to be very wary of those people, regardless of what their motivations are, whether it be ignorance or sin and evil. They're not someone that you can trust, okay? Either way. Best case scenario, they're ignorant. Even in that instance, you can't trust them. So, but the second type of person who may kind of, out of their trauma and their own denial, support your abuser and take your abuser's side, would be a fellow victim. And this is incredibly painful. So sometimes when a victim is still in the denial phase, right, or they haven't come to terms yet with the fact that their abuser is an abuser, and they're choosing to be this way, and they're unrepentant, and so this victim is just, they're hoping it's not true. They're hoping it's all a misunderstanding. They think you're being judgmental for coming out so strong against this abuser. They may have even witnessed you being abused. And of course, if they've been abused too, then yes, they've witnessed abuse. They've experienced abuse. But for whatever reason, whether it be some sort of like Stockholm syndrome type thing, or like I said, they're still in that denial phase of recovery, it's going to be very, very hard to get through to that person and to get them to admit that their abuser is an abuser. And it's going to be very traumatic, both for them and for you as their loved one. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you have a family member who fits into either or both of these categories, because let's face it, sometimes there are enablers and even abusers who have been victims in the past. We need to grieve these people, okay? Regardless of why they're the way that they are, we need to grieve them. We are suffering a loss. They are not physically dead, but maybe our relationship is dead, or our relationship is severely damaged, or our trust in them has died. And so we're going through a grieving process. And what I'm here to tell you is that that is okay. It is okay to grieve people who are still alive. In fact, it is sorrow and grief are a healthy response to loss. So, you're going to process this in a very similar way as someone who has physically had someone die. You're going to go through a period where you two are in denial. You just can't believe that they can't see this. It's like, what? You witnessed my abuse. You know that he or she lied. You know that they act this way. Why can't you see this? And so we're in this state of denial, that they're in denial, right? Or that they're an enabler. And so it's layer upon layer of pain that we're talking about here. There's going to be a period where we go through anger at them. We're going to be frustrated with them, and justifiably so, because evil should be angering, right? When we see abuse, when we see the damage that abuse causes, that makes God angry. I mean, this is something that angers Jesus Christ. And so we wouldn't be good Christians if this didn't upset us. And you're going to go through a period of depression. But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to let ourselves process these emotions so that we can come to a place of peace and acceptance, saying, okay, my sibling, they are an abuse victim, but they're still a victim. They're not a survivor yet. They are in denial. They are confused. And, I'm just going to be as involved as I can, within reason and within safety limits. I'm going to be as involved as I can so that at the very least that they know that when they come to terms with the fact that this is an abuser, they know that they can come talk to me. Okay. So, and then of course, when you're dealing with an enabler, that's a whole other ball of wax, because you're dealing with someone who knows the truth, but for whatever reason, they're covering up the truth and they're enabling and protecting your abuser. And so honestly, unless that person repents of that evil, they are not a safe person to be around. They are not someone who you should trust ever. So that's, again, it's a relationship that you have to grieve. And, sometimes as Christians, we have to come to terms with the fact that someone we dearly love, maybe our mom, maybe our dad, maybe a sibling, or grandparent, an uncle, whatever, they're not physically dead, but they're spiritually dead. They don't have the fruit of the Spirit in their heart. We talked about that last time in Galatians 5. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, grace, gentleness, and self-control. These are the fruits of the Spirit. Covering up abuse, lying for an abuser, pretending that evil is no big deal. These are the works of the flesh, okay? These are bad signs. They are signs that someone is not genuinely saved. So we need to grieve for them. And, again, set up those boundaries. And I'll come back to boundaries at the end of this. The third thing that you need to realize is that you are not responsible for other people's choices. Okay, whether the person that you love is an abuser or an enabler or a fellow victim, you can't control how they feel. You can't control how they respond to, various things, whether that be your abuser's evil or you sharing your truthful account. You can't control, and you are not responsible for how other people respond to those things, okay? And if somebody really wants to believe something, and I think the election and this whole situation with hi sweetie, this is my husband Jason. I think the election and this whole situation with COVID has really showed us, regardless of what your views are, that if somebody wants to believe a certain thing, they're gonna believe it, right? Unless they're open-minded to hear other people's perspectives, to consider new information, to do the research, unless they've got that open heart, they're going to believe what they want to believe, and you can't fix them. You can't change them. You can't control them. So that's something that we need to put in that column. Remember our list? We need to put that in the column of these are things we cannot control. These are things that we give to God in prayer. These are things that we try to let go of, that we repeat to ourselves. You know what? This is their choice. This is their responsibility. I am not going to carry this on my conscience. I'm not going to worry about this, and I'm not going to let this ruin my holidays, or add stress to my healthy relationships. I think so often, especially just as an abuse survivor, could you please go away? So often as an abuse survivor, that there's stressors and complicated relationships in my life that in the past I've let kind of seep into my healthy relationship with Jason, or how I'm parenting my kids, my attitude, my mood. And so, we can't let that stuff damage the good relationships that we have. We just can't. We've got to figure out a way to separate ourselves, to stop taking responsibility for other people's actions, to stop trying to influence their feelings or convince them of things that they don't want to believe. If they don't want to believe something, they're not going to. Maybe eventually they will if God softens their heart, but there's nothing you and I can do to change their minds or to soften their heart. So that's my third point, is you're not responsible for other people's choices. And we really need to take that to heart. And finally, this comes back to issues of boundaries. In addition to just saying, okay, look, this person over here is an abuser, this person over here is an enabler, this person over here is a victim and I love them very much, but I can't help them right now because whenever they see me, they get angry or I'm triggering some trauma. I've had it happen actually where people who I dearly loved, because we have very similar pasts, they associate me with trauma. Even though I didn't do anything wrong, they relate so strongly with me that we kind of bounce off each other. So like if I'm anxious and they know me really well, then they're going to be anxious, and or vice versa. And so, you need to have these boundaries in place with, okay, Susie over here is someone who, for whatever reason, whenever we get together, I stress her out, we stress each other out, she stresses me out, whatever it may be. I'm going to trust her to the care of God, to her counselor, to her pastor. I'm going to be there for her when she needs me, but I need to have these boundaries so that we're not bouncing off each other and exacerbating each other's trauma, because it's not helpful, right? Sometimes loving someone, this has been an extremely painful realization for me. Sometimes loving someone means stepping out of their life, okay? So if you are exacerbating their trauma, if you're If, being with you reminds them of sad things and then they get depressed or anxious, as much as we want to fix everything and encourage people and build each other up, sometimes what we need to do is actually give people space. So that is a very hard call, and if you have to make that call, I'm very sorry. But it is something that we deal with as abuse survivors, and so boundaries, knowing who it's safe to be around, and in what context. Okay, so one thing you can do, for example, if you have a family member who is just really avid about a particular politician and they talk about it all the time and it drives you up the wall, you can talk to that person and you can say, you know what, I love you. I want to spend time with you. I've been really stressed about this election. I've been really stressed about COVID. So could you do me a favor and let's just not talk about those things during Thanksgiving? Just not talk about those things. Let's talk about things that make us happy, that make us thankful. And I'll make a deal with you. If I slip up, if I forget, and I start talking about politics or COVID or some other depressing thing, you'll walk out of the room. You won't engage. You won't argue with me. And vice versa, I'll do likewise, right? If you slip up, if you start ranting about politics and the election, I'll walk out of the room. I won't engage. And we are going to agree to disagree and to have a nice Thanksgiving together. And we're not going to fight about these things. Okay, so, and I kind of already covered this, but again, family history. You can if you've told your family that you've been abused, you can ask them not to talk about abuse over Thanksgiving. One would think that would be pretty duh, but I can't tell you how many abuse survivors have come to me and said, we were having family dinner and Aunt Roberta brought up, this childhood crud and right in front of Uncle Jerry, and I was so embarrassed and it just ruined my night. Tell people like that it's off limits. If you want to talk to me about these things, you can tell them this. You can tell them you don't want to talk about it at all. But for example, you can say, if you want to talk about these things, please email me about it or please text me about it. Don't talk to me about it to my face because I need time to process these things. Don't put me on the spot, right? And don't talk about it in front of other people. As a woman, I would be mortified if somebody brought up, my sexual abuse, for example, in front of a man. It could really embarrass me and hurt me. Like it's weird. Like I can talk about these things, but that's because it's on my terms and when I'm ready, and I can reveal what I want to reveal when I want to reveal it. Okay. But if Aunt Roberta is just blah, 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 talking about stuff, because she's had too much eggnog, that's a problem and I can't control that. And so she's taking the choice away from me. She's taking my control of my story away from me. And that's not responsible. And so, we want to be very clear with our loved ones, what these boundaries are. Okay, if you want to talk about this, let's do it in this context by ourselves, via email, whatever helps you in your situation. But not over the holidays. Okay, so let's put all that stressful stuff behind us, and let's just focus on being thankful, on the love of Jesus, on the love of our family, on our friends, on the good, what little good things have happened this year. Let's close out 2020 in as much of a positive way as possible. And frankly, if someone doesn't like that, if someone is offended that you want to talk about positive stuff instead of depressing and stressful stuff, then they've got issues. And that might be a time when you say, you know what, I'm actually really worried about, traveling during this shutdown, and I think I'm just going to stay home. And you know what? It's okay to do that. There's no law that you have to get together with family over the holidays. It is not a law in the Bible. It's certainly not a law of the land. You can be alone. You can choose to spend it with friends. You can choose to spend it with your cat. It's okay. If you need space away from your family to heal, to be emotionally safe, to rest, take this time. Take this time and rest and grow. You know, when Jesus came, what did the angels say? Peace on earth. Take this time to have peace. And, you know, if that means telling someone, sorry, no, you can't come over for Thanksgiving, or sorry, no, I'm not visiting for Christmas, that's okay. And you know what? If they love you, then they'll respect that decision, and they'll be okay. They will be okay. But on the other hand, you know, if they choose to be offended, if they choose to hold a grudge or be resentful, then again, that's their choice. That's a choice that they're making. And so, you know, self-care, I think especially during this time, we've got COVID, we've got the holidays, we've got a crazy election going on. Self-care right now is really, really important. And I don't want to say that in a corny, you know, or superficial sort of way. I'm talking about measures that need to be taken in order to preserve your positive state of mind, your emotional health, your spiritual health. Spend time with God. Give all these things up in prayer. And, you know, just find that peace. You know, read Matthew, read Luke and Mark. Glory in the gospel story. This time of year, I mean, we should be glorying in the gospel story all year long, right? But when we read about Jesus Christ, who left heaven, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but became man, became fallible, became capable of getting sick, getting viruses, became capable of weakness and hunger and exhaustion and sorrow, and he became like us. He became human, fully God and fully man. And so he did that not only so that he could save us from our sin. That's the most important thing, obviously. But he also did that so that we would know that we have a God who sympathizes with our every weakness. So I hope that this has been encouraging to you. It's definitely been a longer podcast. But again, those questions: how do I cope with depression and COVID? And how do I cope with toxic family members? Oh, it's so hard, but I will be praying for you guys. And you know what? Please also pray for me. Pray for me as I continue to aspire to help people who are struggling with depression and suicidal ideation, who are calling their church leaders and family members to account, who are holding them accountable for terrible sins and crimes. So please pray that God would give me wisdom, that he would give me peace, and I will pray the same for you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving.